So the theme of my paper today is the challenge of turning theory into practice, particularly in the field of medicine. And I would like to discuss one health practice in particular that was especially difficult to put into practice in the past, namely the practice of body weighing. Body weighing for health purposes dates back to the 16th century and was a topic of interest, particularly for 18th century physicians who discussed the potential health benefits of body weighing in medical advice literature, and some of them even embarked on lengthy body weighing experiments in order to learn more about what we would now call metabolism. But it would be a while still before body weighing became widely practiced. And part of that challenge to popularizing this practice was the simple fact that weighing devices were not yet widely accessible. However, the particular manner in which 18th century physicians approached body weighing also played a role in preventing this practice from becoming more widespread at the time. First, we must understand how the practice of body weighing for health started. Now, let me see if I can do this slide. Oh, yeah, there we go. So the first known instance of body weighing for health purposes dates from the late 16th century when physician Santorio commenced a series of body weighing experiments over the course of 25 to 30 years. Santorio was born in Capodistria, today that's Koper in Slovenia, on the 29th of March 1561 and graduated from the University of Padua in philosophy and medicine in 1585. Santorio developed his interest in quantification and experimental medicine early on in his career, and Fabrizio Bigotti has estimated that he may have begun his weighing trials as early as 1584. Using a chair attached to a steelyard, Santorio experimented on himself and others to measure minute changes in the weight of the body in a 24-hour period. He weighed not only the body, but also the body's excretions, urine and stool, and his food and drink. Alongside this, Santorio measured also the pulse, the temperature of the body, as well as the temperature and humidity of the room. The purpose of body weighing for Santorio was to find out the total sum of and the proportions between the body's various excretions. If a person eats a pound of food, how much of that is excreted through stool and urine? How much of it is absorbed by the body? During these trials, Santorio discovered that a large portion of what he ate and drank was excreted not through urine or stool, but through insensible perspiration. Vapors pass through the pores of our skin and our mouth, the particles of which were so small that we cannot perceive them. Hence, it was referred to as insensible perspiration. It was distinguished from visible sweat. The most important discovery that the weighing experiment of Santorio yielded was that the body lost more weight through insensible perspiration than all other excretions combined. As such, Santorio concluded that insensible perspiration was the most significant of all the body's excretions, and maintaining healthy levels of insensible perspiration was therefore absolutely vital to health. So for Santorio, health consisted of ensuring that the body's various excretions were in healthful proportions with one another and in healthful proportion with the body's ingestions, the food and the drink. Indeed, an important reason for weighing the body was to achieve a perfect balance between food and drink and the body's excretions. The weight of the body naturally fluctuates throughout the day as a result of eating, drinking, urinating, bowel movements, sweating. But Santorio argued that as long as in a 24-hour period, the body returns to the same weight it has started at, a healthy balance had been achieved. Keeping to this weight range of that 24-hour period, Santorio used the term latitudinis ponderis salubris, which was later translated by John Quincy as a healthful standard, was an indication that such an equilibrium was achieved, while any alteration of it revealed the potential onset of a latent disease. An unexpected shift in weight was not only a sign of potential ill health, but also a warning to the weigher that adjustments had to be made in either the evacuations or the food or drink taken in to restore the body to that healthful standard. Knowing and managing the quantity of food and drink taken in was an integral part of Santorio's approach to health management. He wrote, "If it be known exactly how much food is convenient for every day, such a person may easily preserve his health and strength to a great age." The right quantity of food could be found by using Santorio's weighing device. The seat of the chair, once the Weight Watcher had reached a certain body weight, would drop, which resulted in the table carrying the food becoming physically out of reach, as can be seen on the frontispiece of many later publications of Santorio's Medicina Statica. As Fabrizio Bigotti explained, Santorio's instruments were designed to both measure changes of the body and to assist in preventing changes taking place. Through the weighing chair, weight gain and loss could be detected, and adjustments to diet or the other non-naturals could be made before the Weight Watcher strayed too far from his healthful standard into a state of disease. The findings of Santorio's trials were published in the Medicina Statica, which became a textbook for generations of physicians and was republished several times between the late 17th and early 18th century. It was translated by medical writer and student of Newtonian philosophy John Quincy as Medicina Statica, being the aphorisms of Santorius translated into English with large explanations, which would be revised and republished another 5 times until 1738. John Quincy claimed that Santorio's work was already a particular favourite with the faculty when he published his first translation of Santorio's Medicina Statica in 1720. And his aim was not really to revive Santorio in the medical circles, but rather to bring him into a larger acquaintance by translating it into English and adding explanations, rendering the text easy and intelligible to almost any person, as Quincy himself put it in his preface. It was not the first time Medicina Statica had been translated. In 1676, Santorio's aphorisms were published as Rules of Health, but Quincy argued that that version contained too many terms and Latin phrases, limiting its potential readership. Another Latin version of the Statica Medicina appeared in 1701, which contained commentary by Martin Lister. And not only was Santorio's work republished, but the experiments themselves were also put to the test. First, physician James Cale undertook a weighing experiment in 1708 in Northampton, and similar experiments were undertaken in Ireland by physicians George Rye between 1721 and 1722, and Brian Robinson between 1721 and 1745, and in Scotland in Edinburgh by physician Francis Home in 1751. The last of such weighing experiments undertaken in Britain was concluded in 1769 by London physician William Stark. Now, the purpose of these experiments was not to call into question Santorio's 16th century experiment, but rather to make adjustments for a colder British climate, which Santorio himself had argued would affect the measurements. The warmer Italian weather, it was theorized, would cause Santorio to excrete more through perspiration than people would in the colder British climate. So a new experiment undertaken in Britain would give a more accurate result for how a body in Britain could expect to excrete daily through perspiration. The physicians who undertook these experiments in the 18th century were explicit in their reverence for Santorio and his approach to measuring the excretions of the body, and their own experiments should be seen as attempts to substantiate this approach to quantifying the metabolic process. But while these 18th century physicians embraced the weighing experiment as a means to study the body's excretions, they did not generally recommend that other people undertake similar weighing experiments of their own to find out how much they excreted or how much they should eat to make up for this daily loss. In fact, most physicians, including those that had partaken in body weighing experiments, argue that outside of these intense and carefully controlled medical experiments, weighing the body was simply unnecessary because the body itself already gives us signals of how much we should eat. The 18th century experiment James Cahill himself had warned readers of his work that the rule for eating to everybody is a natural appetite, and by this monitor may everyone be advertised of the proper quantity to be taken in without weighing, for nature never requires more than is convenient, and the appetite is proportionable to the natural evacuations. Another major argument against the practice of body weighing was that it was a practice which was not easily adopted. James Cahill warned that while a person's excreta, and therefore ingesta, can certainly be found out by weighing, he added that weighing required a constant and certain way of living. A man of business cannot find leisure to pursue them with sufficient diligence. The physicians who had weighed themselves did so several times a day over long periods of time in a carefully controlled environment and under strict rules with weighing equipment. John Kinsey, the author of the English translations of the Medicina Statica, warned that even if a person had the time and inclination to undertake a weighing experiment, it was extremely difficult to replicate. Kinsey pointed out that everything from the local temperature to minor changes in diet could influence the results. He therefore advised readers of his Medicina Statica in the commentary that a trial by balance would be too troublesome to put in practice, and that even if the experiment should be tried, the results gained from such an experiment may be true one day, but not the other. Precision was a major theme in these discussions about weighing experiments, and even some of the physicians who had undertaken them received criticisms from other colleagues who argued that their process had not been strict enough or not precise enough to trust the results of their experiments. It was even more unlikely that a layperson should be able to produce any results of value. Some believe that there was also a danger that these experiments could lead to obsessive and therefore unhealthy behavior. London gentleman Joseph Addison published a letter in The Spectator in 1711, which described the lived experience of somebody who tried to manage their health through body weighing. It read, "Having provided myself with this chair, I used to study, eat, drink, and sleep in it, insomuch that I may be said, for these last 3 years, to have lived in a pair of scales. I compute myself, when I am in full health, to be precisely 200 weight, falling short of it about a pound after a day's fast, and exceeding it as much after a full meal. So that it is my continual employment to trim the balance between these two volatile pounds in my constitution. In my ordinary meals, I fetch myself up to 200 weight and a half pound. And if after having dined, I find myself fall short of it, I drink just so much small beer or eat such a quantity of bread as is sufficient to make me weigh. I do not dine and sup by the clock, but by my chair. For when that informs me that my pound of food is exhausted, I conclude myself to be hungry and lay in another with all diligence. This excerpt is especially vivid in its portrayal of how the subject of this letter replaces all the dietary rules with a novel method, weighing his way to a healthful diet instead of adhering to physical cues of hunger or regulated meal times announced by the clock. The statement that this man determined the right time of his meals by means of the chair rather than the clock is particularly evocative of Santorio's method. Santorio had argued in the Medicina Statica that the most proper time of eating had arrived when the body had fully digested the last meal and that the body weight had returned to the same weight it had been before eating, which could not be found out without the weighing chair. However, as Lucia de Combe and more recently Fabiola Zurlini have suggested, this letter was almost certainly written by Addison himself in an attempt to satirize and discredit the practice. So it's not this fictional Weight Watcher is not evidence of early 18th century weighing practices, but instead an imagined straw man for Addison to point out in warning. Nevertheless, it is informative in that it portrays how contemporaries imagined that this practice of body weighing might affect daily life when taken to the extreme. So how then, if not through body weighing experiments, were readers of 18th century health advice literature to determine how much their body excreted every day and what quantity of food they needed to take in to make up for this loss and maintain that healthful standard in their body weight? Some physicians argued that the measuring was already done for people through the experiments of Santorio and Kell and Robinson, and that readers of health guides just follow the general advice resulting from these experiments rather than engage in measuring themselves. This was suggested by Kinsey in translation of his Medicina Statica. He wrote in a letter to the reader, "I am not at all unaware how severe some will be hereupon in requiring how often they must weigh themselves, and whether they ought to drink and eat by the ounce. To whom I am only this to say, that Santorius by the balance has already done enough to convince any serious person of the natural discharges and their proportion to one another, from which any person may soon be the judge of the present state of his constitution without going into a pair of scales." In fact, Kinsey admitted to having deliberately omitted the exactness of the Santorian calculations in his Medicina Statica, because for all intents and purposes, it was sufficient for people to understand that there were such discharges, how the various discharges of the body could be influenced by internal and external factors, and the possible consequences for health if the natural discharges became disrupted. The physicians who had undertaken weighing experiments directed readers to the outcomes of their experiments to deduce what quantity of food was right for them, rather than to undertake weighing trials of their own. Some experimenters, notably Santorio himself, expressed their results in the form of aphorisms or general rules of health designed to direct the reader. For example, Santorio's 36th aphorism read that quantity of food is most healthful when after eating, a person feels as lightsome and active about any labor as when fasting, which advised the reader to rely on his senses to ascertain whether the quantity of food led him to feel heavy or light enough to partake in physical activity. This rule, where the sensation of heaviness was an indicator of a person having eaten too much, was very common in early modern health literature. Others, such as Brian Robinson, provided the results of their experiments in tables which readers could refer to and work out which quantity of food was right for them. Robinson stated in his dissertation that the quantity of food that is necessary to preserve a grown person who uses little exercise but is constantly in good health to be pretty rightly determined in column F of table 1. On the very left column, under column L, readers can find the length of the body and the moving from left to right, the velocity of the blood under V, the pulse per minute under P, and the daily food in ounces under column F. The question remains, of course, whether an average reader would know or would have any access to that sort of information. I don't know whether many people would know the length of their bodies or their pulse, but any such information could be used to find out how much food a person ought to consume without needing to undertake a weighing experiment of their own. James Cahill went a little bit further still than Robinson by arguing that the portion of daily food suitable to a person in circumstances similar to Robinson's own, so age, exercise, constitution, and general health, is about 4 pounds. And Kinsey commented on this statement that this quantity settled by Cahill is very likely the quantity convenient to most people. Cahill did advise to his readers to consider their own situations rather than just copy his measurements. So readers of his treatise were expected to be their own judge of the truth of the aphorisms. And if one aphorism did not answer to his expectations, to look over the tables by comparing one day to another to pick out what he pleases. So in other words, readers of his work were expected to take an active role in the constructing of their own dietary rules, for which the aphorisms and tables were offered as tools for people to determine how much they should eat in order to maintain that healthful balance between food ingested and matter excreted. Other 18th century suggestions for balancing the ingesta and excreta did sometimes involve an aspect of weighing or measuring, but 18th century physicians seem to have attached less value to precision when it came to measuring for the purpose of health maintenance, as opposed to measuring as part of a medical experiment. Bath physician George Cheney, for example, admitted that weight and measure were troublesome, and so he recommended to his readers that they eat and drink by their eye. That is, determining first of all whether by weight or measure, or by particular observation or experiment, the bulk or number of mouthfuls of meat and the number of glasses of strong liquors under which we are best, and then by our eye determining an equal quantity at all times for the future. So this involved only a single instance of weighing or measuring, after which people were free to estimate. Aside from this method, Cheney also suggested readers could try to find the quantity of food that give him regularly 1 stool a day, or simply whatever the quantity the reader felt easiest under. Using the Santorian chair was only the 7th out of a total of 8 total suggestions for how readers might determine what quantity of food was right for them. While Cheney ascribed enough value to Santorio and his weighing chair to recommend this method to his readers, he did not attach the same value to precision as Santorio did. Cheney assured his readers, "Our food need not be adjusted to mathematical points. A little over or under will make no difference in our health." So, physicians of the 17th and 18th century almost unanimously advised that a weighing experiment such as Santorio's was not suitable as a method for managing dietary intake. Described as troublesome and labor-intensive, warnings by Kinsey, Cahill, and George Cheney may in fact explain why we have not found much evidence of weighing practices among the non-medical public before the 1760s, despite the popularity of the topic of body weight. Most health advice for determining the right dietary intake can continue to refer to appetite, or feelings of fullness or heaviness and discomfort. If the correct amount of food was to be quantified, this was usually done by a physician based on his own experiments, the results of which were expressed in aphorisms and tables, which readers could consult for guidance on how much food they ought to consume daily. The practice of body weighing remained pretty much limited to the medical circles until the second half of the 18th century, when we do come across more evidence of body weighing taking place outside of medical experiments. Limited availability of weighing equipment plays a significant part in this, but the manner in which people weighed themselves in the early half of the 18th century also necessarily limited the practice to the very few physicians who had the time and the means and the equipment to embark on complex and lengthy weighing trials, too troublesome for ordinary people to adopt. That body weighing eventually became widely practiced, we all know too well, but it would require a departure from Santorio's focus on precision weighing before that could happen.